Greetings and God bless. So, my idea, like a lot of employers want employees to return to work, but after the year of lockdowns and subsequent working remotely, and even before that, employees were doing everything they could to work remotely, be in another country. That what I think is employers need to acquire housing for their employees, and CEOs get that. Different companies own apartments that they give to their CEOs rent free or something like that. It's part of their compensation. And what needs to be done is, especially entry level workers, because that's who everybody's complaining about. Nobody's complaining, oh, I don't have enough insurance adjusters or I don't have enough real estate agents. Like these more middle and high level people, their grandparents, their parents are paying for them if they had any losses during COVID, during the lockdowns. But it's these entry level workers who have nobody to back them up, and they need housing. So large supermarkets need to rent, even just buy properties. If you're a large business, if you're a gas station, if you're whatever, you need to buy property and then rent to your employees and have some sort of thing where if the employee isn't working there anymore, they need to move or something like that. I don't know that part of it, but uh, housing is the problem, and a commute is a problem. It's known, it's like a cliche that anything above like 30 minutes then becomes a problem is in the commute. And I've heard 3 hours is also actually a positive commute. But if somebody's doing 3 hour commutes, they can't do that every day. They're commuting Monday and staying in town until Thursday. They're staying at the studio apartment they're renting for the week, and then they're going home for a 3 day weekend. So things are so much better when an employee can just wake up, be next door to the job. So they wake up, they do their breakfast, they do their workout, and then they walk, 30 feet to the office. And then they can come home for lunch, maybe take a little nap, when they're feeling a little low. It is so much better than this crazy suburban nightmare, so that you're dealing with crazy drivers who are threatening your life. You're dealing with unsafe roads with potholes, you know, uh, and just weird traffic things that can happen in, wintertime, and snow and ice and wind and rain, and just inexperienced drivers or reckless drivers. People who are more reckless nowadays, I would say, seems like people are more reckless. Since you're an employer and you want more employees, if you have, and it's all exploitation. Admit it. If you're an employer, you're there to exploit people who are dumb, resourceless, but are useful because they're making you money. They're making you money. They're making you money for you doing basically nothing other than making a good selection and being in the right place at the right time. So if you want to continue to make money exploiting people, there needs to be housing. And that's the problem that everybody, it's like the elephant in the room. Nobody wants to acknowledge. But if you have housing, if you're not getting enough clerks, at the grocery store or at the gas station or wherever, entry level coffee shop, somebody is doing an Airbnb and or has property, and just you need to buy property. If you need to build something, do that. And if you need to change the zoning, because that seems to be the problem. So no buildings are allowed, other than a single family home. And then there's like zoning restrictions, so there's only businesses can build. And so there's no place to live, but you need people to work. So if locals, and that's what I notice is locals despise low income housing, locals despise entry level workers, but they want the person to serve them coffee. They want somebody at the fast food restaurant to give them their burger. And you just can't have it both ways. You can't despise your entry level worker and make it impossible for that entry level worker to have a place that they can afford. And then you can't complain that there's nobody willing to work. People are willing to work uh, if they have a place to live that they can afford. But the paradigm that exists right now, and everybody's pretty content with it, is that entry level workers are giving all of their pay for rent, and and employers are only paying what might cover barely the rent that the employee is having to pay. $1,500 is ridiculous. I mean, I'm looking at places that are like flyover states, and like this is ridiculous. And I think there's such a rejection of low income people, and there's this assumption that everybody who's low income is a drug addict and mentally ill and homeless. But if they can afford a place, they're not homeless. And if they have drug addiction and mental illness, well, number one, if somebody's mentally ill, they need shelter. It's disgusting how cities are like, oh yeah, you just keep the homeless outside on the street so they can terrorize passersby and just dissolve, over time outside. It's disgusting, and that's what I notice here in Denver. And people are like, well, the homeless don't want to play the game. They won't go through the hoops. They won't do what we tell them to do. Now, the thing is, it's human trafficking. That's the unfortunate thing about pretty much everything now. But getting assistance means that you're going to be trafficked. You're basically trafficked by the government, and the government is this. It does this bait and switch. It's like, we're going to give you this if you give us that, because the government wants to get a piece of you. Like, it's not like, oh, let's try to work with you and get you into a place. Like, there's shady stuff. And when you are really vulnerable, you have no rights, you have no dignity, you have no safety. And and nobody cares. Nobody wants to do anything about it, and everybody really just wants to blame the homeless, mentally ill drug addict. Now, if we look, these majority of homeless people now, as of 2023, I would say it's been due to these international investors purchasing properties, property managers purchasing, excuse me, properties and not even renting them, or renting them at a overpriced rate that nobody local can afford. And so these people from California are moving in, or Oregon, or New York, or something like that, keeping prices up. And so this is like this engineered homelessness. And so when somebody's homeless, when you're living on the street, after a few months, your decision making is gone. You're not eating right. You're not getting good sleep. And so drugs come into the picture because that helps people stay up. I That's what I've heard. And so so the homelessness leads to drug use. And who's bringing this fentanyl in? Who's bringing drugs into the United States? So I have seen articles, like mainstream articles, pointing out that a lot of street drugs are manufactured in factories that make regular drugs, like make prescription drugs. So the prescription drug factories are also making illegal drugs that are then sent to the black market. And we hear the Mexican cartels are bringing drugs in. We are hearing the drugs that the Mexicans are bringing in are from China. So again, this is an engineered drug abuse scenario. And then we look at cities that are giving out drug paraphernalia, like New York or Portland, Oregon. So this is like in your face, just like chemtrails, just like the government admitting that it's putting heavy metals into the air to deflect sunlight to prevent global warming. And people will deny this, even though the government itself says this. So these are engineered crises, and I think that the homeless mental illness, and so yeah, when somebody's homeless, mental illness is going to happen, and mental illness is being engineered anyway. Just so many things could be the cause of that, and this is weaponizing people to be in the most vulnerable and um, excitable and reactive way, which then is like well, like it can subject others who are housed and not so doing struggling so much. Like you're weaponizing homeless mentally ill drug addicts against passersby on the sidewalk or on public transportation. And I think this is the city's fault and government and state funding, federal and state funding that subsidize corrupt city officials, because there's all this money, there's millions, billions in the nation going to homelessness and drug addiction that is not working. And homelessness and drug addiction and mental illness on the streets has blown up, even though more and more money is going into it. So clearly, there needs to be an audit done. Everybody's not doing their job. And the thing is, if one person does their job, those criminals around them are going to be like, you got to stop doing that because you're making us look bad. So, and there's just this conspiracy to create this homeless problem. And I, again, if there's housing that's like $500 a month, $600 a month max, those homeless people are going to find a place. Those, if you have 100 units at $600, those homeless people will find a way to pay every month. And yes, there's going to be onesie twosie people that are a problem, and that's just life. And I know landlords are just like, they should never have any difficulties. The thing is, everybody has difficulties. When you own a car, your mechanic lies to you and messes with your car. When you have a telephone account, your telephone company messes with you. Like AT&T, they deleted all the minutes I had. They deleted my phone number. And they're like, you never had this phone number. I had to spend hours. So every system has some scummy element to it. And landlords need to stop behaving like they should never have any problems when everybody has a problem with every single thing, including landlords. Like landlords are some of the biggest nightmares. So it's just, I don't know, like landlords are big babies. It seems you make a huge profit because you have something that people absolutely desperately need and are forced into, which is having to do a rental or buy a house. And when you have your own home, there's a lot of upkeep. There's a lot of things that are going on. When you have a spouse or family visiting, like people complain, people have needs, people are difficult, people disappoint you, people betray you, and landlords are like, well, my tenants should never do this. And I mean, maybe, I don't know, I've always been a renter, and uh and I mean, there have been times where I haven't had to pay rent, but um and I've observed other renters, and I've never seen another renter um be as bad as who I hear landlords complaining about. So, I mean, I've lived in buildings where people committed suicide. I've lived in buildings where people hostage. I've lived in buildings where, I don't know, just stuff happened. And like my dad was a building superintendent, and he dealt with it. And it was, I mean, yes, those things were horrific or whatever, but it was done by the end of the day. It was taken care of in 24 hours. Uh, and I don't know, maybe systems, maybe law has been weaponized against landlords now in ways that I don't understand. But when I have met landlords, they're gallivanting about having the high life, and I think they just don't want to work on the building that they own. And that's just life. You work on the building you own, and most, from what I've observed as a renter, is most property managers don't want to fix anything. They don't want to upgrade anything. They don't want to address the neglect that they've had on buildings, and they consider anybody who observes the problem, that tenant is a problem. So I don't know. I mean, and yes, there's exceptions, but I'm 53 years old and lived in apartments most of my life, and I've had shelter most of my life. I've lived with other people who were, you know, just living there, and nobody's been like an extreme nightmare that I can think of. Really, the people who behave the worst are entitled, privileged rich people who feel that they can get away with everything. I think because they must be lawyers, or know the law, and know that they can get away with stuff, and they do. And I think, like, maybe when one entitled rich person encounters this other entitled person, uh, that that original entitled landlord is like, how dare you be like me? How dare you be as conscienceless as me? So, and maybe there's a way. I mean, I don't think a landlord should be treated unfairly by a tenant at all. Got to be a way. There's got to be some way of protecting. And I've heard that nowadays there isn't a way of protecting from an evil tenant. But if that is the case, then landlords are still doing really good, because I don't know of any evil. I mean, actually, I knew this one lady, one tenant, and she didn't pay when there was problems. She didn't pay her rent, it seemed to me, when there was problems with the plumbing for like a couple weeks in this one building, because she was like, you know, uh, the landlord wasn't providing a basic service, and I was like, I'm paying, and everybody else paid their rent, even though they didn't have a toilet for a couple weeks. So when 10 people out of 11 pay their rent, and the landlord's just focusing on the one person who doesn't pay their rent, and the landlord is still able to, spend weeks at retreat centers and get yoga certifications and blah blah blah. Like, really? Like, but yeah, I don't know. It's human nature to just focus on the one problem, and not the not the 90% of good things that are working out. So, anyways, my point is that there's basically no housing that an entry level person can afford. And yes, employers and people who have an easy living are like, well, that person should just work 2 jobs, or they should work 3 jobs, even though these conceited, self-satisfied, privileged people couldn't work 3 jobs themselves. They couldn't be on their feet 3 jobs working at McDonald's, Starbucks, and the grocery store. But the same people are assuming that entry level workers can do that. The only way anybody can do that, if they are, is probably being propped up on cigarettes and coffee and drugs, and that's not healthy. So people need to get realistic. Like, it is unfair, how what's expected of somebody, an entry level worker, to pay and to physically do in order to get that pay, to afford an overpriced property that remote owners are benefiting from. So yeah, like, what city makes sure that that it's not like these remote, evil property managers or international investors that are profiting from the housing, because that, when somebody is just like stealing basically from your local area because they purchase the money and they're paying your property taxes, uh, but they're charging overpriced rates. They're expecting people to pay more than a place is worth to rent. Like that just seems it's bad news because when everybody's living everywhere else but they own property, like that is not making your city strong. Like that's what I noticed in Missoula, uh, Montana. So Missoula is always written up in outdoor magazines and whatnot, and there's some really beautiful parts of it, but again, it's less than 1% vacancy rate is very crazy. And entry level workers, like I met other women who are a little bit older than me, and they had the hardest time finding a place of their own to rent. And they were cashiers, and um, they did not have, they were making, $1,000 a month. So they could not spend 1,500 or even $1,000 or $900 on rent. And so they were trying to find like any reasonable amount for, a single person is like $500. Like that's because we have to pay utilities. So that's, going up. And like, I don't know, it's weird because like sometimes your utilities is not what, you're being forced to pay somebody else's utilities. That was my experience in a rental when I was living alone, and my rent for electricity, or my bill for electricity was $50, and then I was shared a roommate situation, and it was like $20 when we had fridges and stoves and like all sorts of stuff powered on all the time. And I turned off the fridge most of the month. My fridge was off because I was just like I couldn't afford the rates, and it was still crazy. Like I just was using the light, and I was paying $50 just for an incandescent light to be on. So yeah, and yeah, it's just, you know, it's when you don't have money, it's tough being exploited, and when you are able to make it, like what I notice is employers would like somebody who looks like an executive, even though the employer is only gonna pay them, $13 an hour. They still want you to look like you make $100,000 a year, and like that's a big, not everybody has a wardrobe that looks like you make $100,000 a year that is willing to work for $13 an hour. I mean, it's I don't know, like everybody's just crazy. And of course, because the world is ruled by Satan. So, anyways, my point is that if you're an employer and you want people, if you don't have enough clerks to stock your shelves or work your cash registers or run your coffee bar or the gas station, you need to have a place where your employee can rent. And yeah, I mean, and maybe have some storage unit available for, let's say they get fired or they quit and they need to move out, so you can have somebody else. So there's ways to make something like this work. um, but yeah, that's what I see is a need if you're really going to keep businesses running, because people like just, especially with gas prices and them trying to make cars illegal. I mean, what entry level worker can afford an electric vehicle? Like, what entry level worker has $100,000 to spend on an electric vehicle that might not work in the wintertime, that won't work on a maybe a you know like yeah. So there are solutions, I think, and again, zoning needs to be revised, because if you look at certain cities 100 years ago, people were living in downtown or something like that. There was a YMCA and whatnot, and everything's been zoned to be commercial. But and 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 the thing is, not as many people are using commercial spaces. The riots shut down a lot of things. The shoplifting has shut down a lot of things. And, of course, lockdowns and working remotely has made it um, too expensive for businesses to rent. So if you look at commercial properties nationwide, it's down, a minimum of 10%, but I've seen it like 30% in like New York and San Francisco. So if we change zoning, like number one, there's hundreds of people living on the street as homeless people. So, how about we change zoning and pick a building that everybody can agree on somewhat and make that housing for low income people and, start from there. Or just, maybe not even, I mean, the homeless situation needs to be dealt with, but again, back to the employees, like change zoning so employees have a place when they're working at the coffee shop or the grocery store or whatever, because there's so much space. That's something I noticed, like when I was in Iowa and here in Denver. There's so much space. There's all these empty buildings. Um, so there is real estate, and I think the zoning and there's people who have a chokehold on cities not allowing for more housing unless it's for millionaires. Like when I was in, back to my first point, when I was in Missoula, Montana, it's just a destination for rich people, and not many live there year round because it's tough. It's tough from maybe October to spring. Like it's cold and it can be icy and icy for months on end, and it's just treacherous. It's treacherous to walk on the sidewalk, or the roads are icy, and the city does not plow and it doesn't salt the roads because of the new environmentalist stuff. You're just supposed to walk on ice and live on ice for 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, because we don't want to mess with the water. So your safety is irrelevant, because what matters more is the fish in the water than your safety walking on ice for 6 months, 8 months. So millionaires will buy a condo and that's what happened. They built all this housing, and I think it was supposed to be like affordable housing, and instead they made it all millionaire housing. So they have like 100 millionaires or whatever, 200 millionaires living there, and those millionaires don't live. They do not reside all year round. So what happens when you have people who have purchased all of your properties and they don't really live there? Like other parts of Missoula, there'd be like entire blocks. Every week I'd walk home from doing my laundry, and I'm like, there's nobody on the street. There's no cars here. And so all these people are living, I don't know, in California or Florida or something, I don't know. And uh, so you have like a ghost town, like very pretty infrastructure, but nobody, like half of the people, 60% of the people are living somewhere else. So the only people who are there are like the students who are not local, and then you have some old families, and then you have the poor people who can't afford to go out of town. And so that's what your city is based on. Like, majority of millionaires who aren't there, who just pay your property taxes, and then a handful of locals, and a majority of people who are too poor to go out of town, and they would if they could. Like, I'm more into a city where the locals live there, and when they travel, maybe they're traveling, one city over or something like that, but not going to Thailand and Mexico and, you know, like what is this? What is this thing where people are traveling so much? Like travel is like, I mean, it's great to see new places. I would love to see Italy and France and whatever. But like people are spending all this money and financially burdening themselves. And I think that yes, they enjoy it, but I think they're doing it out of a social pressure that they have to be some worldly something something. If you really need a break, if you really need relaxation, get some body work. Spend that money on a body worker. Spend that money on getting, some acupressure or doing some great supplements or getting a mud bath or doing you know, immersion in, those tanks, flotation tanks. Like, get a facial or something like that. Like that is very relaxing, and you don't have to travel, you don't have to deal with delays, you don't have to deal with 8 hours in the airport because the flight was delayed. You don't have to deal with crazy people on the airplane freaking out or whatever. I, I mean, of course, it is wonderful, and I think it is great to visit historic sites or scenic sites and whatnot. But I don't know. I just think like people are investing more in being a tourist than investing in where they live, and it seems like every place nation worldwide is trying to be a tourist destination. And yes, every place has its merits and whatnot, but why? Like so who has all this money to be a tourist? Because the poor people don't, and working class people can't really. Like working class people are already overextended with the mortgage and the new car and what's taking care of the kids and whatnot. um like it's just like, are people just going into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt to keep up with the Joneses? Like how are they planning to pay this off? What, if somebody loses their job, like, and it goes into bankruptcy, I mean, I guess people are just assuming they're going to go bankrupt, and so they're not worried about any consequences about being in such debt. I don't know. It's very, and then maybe life is just so miserable. People are like, I just need to get a different perspective. And so that's why they're traveling. And yes, I could see, I mean, and that, of course, there's millions of reasons, good reasons why people should travel and why my opinion it may be flawed. But I do really think though, when people are occupying, hundreds of units and they're never living there, I think that's a problem. I think cities could care less. Cities actually want less people there, so cities don't have to deal with infrastructure, repaving roads that are, they're happy. A city is happy that 300 people live somewhere else and are not driving on the roads and whatnot, cluttering up traffic. But um, if that same city wants employees who are going to work at the gas station and the coffee shop and the donut shop, there has to be some place that those entry level employees can afford. And I think what places expect is that those entry level jobs are for teenagers who are living at home. But those teenagers living at home don't want to do those jobs. And people are full of contempt. They're like, no adult who's raising children should be working in a fast food joint or something like that. Though, if you are, you should be working. You should find a better job. If those people who are adults with two children and working at the donut shop, if they could find a better job, they would have. But it's not that easy. Not everybody is in the Illuminati, in the Freemasons, and doing child human sacrifice so they get the good job. Not everybody is into doing human trafficking. So, these basic entry level jobs, these are the most important jobs. The gas station person, the coffee person, the grocery clerk. those people are the most important jobs. They contribute the most to the functioning of society, and there's served so much disrespect and expected to pay the most and get the least and get kicked in the teeth while we're at it. So, anyways, yeah, I think zoning needs to be revised, and you know, it's probably not going to be like, I think this is, cities really like homelessness. It is clear they like homelessness. They like drug addiction. Cities like drug addiction, and they like mental illness, being on the sidewalks, and they like cities like danger law abiding citizens who are on the sidewalk and taking public transportation. Cities like that. It makes them money, and it makes the locals vote for money for mental illness and for drug control and for homelessness. And then those city people steal that money. And of course, there's nothing's ever fixed year after year, and nobody seems to notice it. And all people do is blame the homeless people and blame the entry level workers for not being at the donut shop in the grocery store, even though those entry level people would be happy to work at the donut shop if they could afford a place in the area. So that's why I keep on saying that zoning needs to be revised to allow workers to have a quick access to work. So it's not this crazy commute from a town over the hills and far away. And I think employers need to start buying real estate and renting to their employees if that's what the business wants to keep doing, if they want to be a grocery store shop or whatever. And yeah, I'm sure there are people working for those different types of businesses that do have properties, and they want to make their 1,500 a month or 2,000 a month or whatever, um, with those Californians who are working remotely, as opposed to allowing a local to live there. And that's the problem, that locals don't want to make it possible for a local to afford a home or afford rent. Locals who own properties want somebody from California to rent. And then the very locals complain about Californians turning things liberal, and the gay pride flag everywhere and stuff like that. You get what you deserve, and it's probably going to continue that way, isn't it? Thanks for watching. God bless.